On the morning of July 22, 1998, at 9 a.m., the Kowloon Central Police Station in Hong Kong received an urgent call. The caller was the general manager of the CWT Group, reporting that his wife, Lin Chunli, had gone missing. He explained that she disappeared around 11 a.m. on July 21st after withdrawing 770,000 HKD from Standard Chartered Bank. Suspecting that she might have been kidnapped, he pleaded with the police to investigate. The police immediately launched an investigation, starting with the bank. The bank teller who assisted Lin confirmed that she had indeed withdrawn the money. Interestingly, she wasn't alone. A well-dressed woman accompanied her. The two appeared close, showing no signs of distress or coercion. After the transaction, they got into a red taxi and headed toward Kowloon Bay. Unfortunately, surveillance systems in 1998 weren't very advanced, so the trio went cold. Left without leads, the police returned to the station to regroup. Just then, another woman walked in to file a missing person report. This woman, surnamed Chen, said her close friend, Cai Xiuzhen, had gone missing. According to Chen, she had accompanied Cai to the bank on the morning of July 21st around 9:30 a.m., where Cai withdrew 220,000 HKD. Cai mentioned she was meeting her friend Lin Chunli to see a master for some kind of spiritual ritual and promised to be back that afternoon. However, by that evening, Cai was unreachable, which left Chen deeply worried. She finally decided to report it to the police. Lin Chunli. Hearing that name, the investigators immediately perked up. Wasn't she the missing wife of the CWT Group manager? With this new lead, they began digging into the connections between Lin and Cai. As it turned out, they were lifelong friends. There was even a third member of their close-knit group, a woman named Xu Shunqin. The three of them were inseparable, always dining, shopping, and playing cards together. They also shared a strong belief in spiritual practices and frequently sought out masters for rituals and blessings. If that was the case, Xu Shunqin might know something. The police tracked down her home phone number and called several times, but no one answered. They even knocked on her door, but there was no response. Could it be that Xu had gone missing too? As the investigation intensified, another report came in. A woman had jumped to her death from T block of Telford Garden at around 2 p.m. The overworked police then had no choice but to drop everything and rush to the scene. But little did they know, this incident would become the key to unraveling the entire case. When the police arrived, a crowd had already gathered around the building. The victim, surnamed Yao, was 44 years old and lived on the 8th floor. Witnesses reported seeing her climb over the railing and jump. As for why she did it, no one knew. The police quickly entered Yao's apartment and were immediately struck by the eerie atmosphere. The place was filled with talismans, incense burners, and ritual tools. A blue toist robe was draped over a chair in the master bedroom. Seemed like she just finished some kind of ritual. Later, Yao's husband confirmed she was deeply involved in a cult and had likely been influenced by their teachings, believing that death could lead to reincarnation. This might explain why she committed suicide. The investigation also revealed that Yao was friends with Lin and Cai, and all three were members of the same cult. Then this raised a chilling possibility. Could the missing women had also committed suicide too? With this in mind, the police turned their attention back to Xu's apartment. At 5 p.m. on July 23rd, they arrived at Unit 501 in Block C of the Telford Garden. Knocking on the door yielded no response, but they could hear the faint hum of an air conditioner inside, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Eventually, the police forced their way in. What they found inside was horrifying. Directly facing the entrance was an altar covered with ritual items, offerings of meat, fish, eggs, talismans, and a pair of scissors wrapped in red thread hung from a mirror above the altar. In the corner of the living room lay the lifeless body of the middle-aged woman with curly hair. She was dressed in a blue and white toist robe and black cloth shoes. Her face was twisted in pain, her eyes half open, and it was clear she had been dead for some time. In the kitchen, another body was found. A long-haired woman in a toist robe and black skirt lying on her side with the same agonized expression. In the bathroom, a short-haired woman, also dressed in a toy's robe, was discovered in a similar state. In the bedrooms, 2 teenage girls were found on separate beds. Though they weren't wearing robes, their faces were similarly contorted. Autopsies revealed that all 5 had died between 1:30 and 2:30 p.m. on July 21st from cyanide poisoning. Their identities were confirmed as Xu Shunqing, 41, the apartment owner; Lin Chunli, 49, the CWT Group manager's wife; Cai Xiuzhen, 45, Xu's 17-year-old daughter; Li Yingxi, and their 15-year-old daughter, Li Yinghui. Now, the missing persons case was solved, but it raised even more disturbing questions. Why had they done this? Was it a ritual suicide, or was it a murder? As the investigation deepened, the police uncovered a series of suspicious details. First, all 5 victims died from cyanide poisoning, yet no containers holding the poison were found in the apartment. Since cyanide acts so quickly, it's impossible for the victims to have disposed of the containers themselves after ingesting it. This led investigators to conclude that someone else must have removed the evidence after their death. Second, apart from Lin and Cai, Xu had also withdrawn over 200,000 HKD from her bank account on the morning of July 21st. However, no trace of this money was found in the apartment, suggesting it, too, was taken by someone else. Third, cultural experts said the ritual items found in the apartment symbolized blessings and disaster prevention, not a sacrificial suicidal ritual. This suggested the victims may have been tricked into ingesting the poison. Fourth, while the cult these women followed did have a history of encouraging followers to commit suicide, their rules required members to die alone, which doesn't match the circumstances of the crime scene. Additionally, Xu's 2 daughters, who were among the victims, weren't members of the cult. Xu had no apparent reason to involve them into a group suicide. Fifth, 3 handwritten notes were found in the apartment, seemingly written by Xu, Cai, and Li. They expressed personal frustrations like marital infidelity, business troubles, and disappointment in their children, appearing to be part of a ritual. However, forensic tests revealed something strange. Not a single fingerprint was found on the note, which was highly suspicious. Clearly, someone had wiped them clean. Lastly, investigators found that 2 calls had been made to Xu's landline at 11:15 a.m. and 12:26 p.m. on the day of the murders. Both calls were traced to different public payphones. The caller deliberately concealed their identity. Piecing these clues together, the police suspected this was a murder disguised as a suicide, likely motivated by financial gain. They immediately began probing the victims' social circles, particularly focusing on mediums or spiritual advisors, and that's when Xu's boyfriend, B, caught their attention. B, a 44-year-old man, ran a small trading company on Argyle Street and claimed to be a Maoshan Toist master. He was well known among the rich and famous for offering feng shui consultations. However, investigations revealed he was nothing but a fraud, a middle school dropout who used the Toist label to scam people and make his first bit of money. Later on, he opened his trading company just to boost his reputation. But the good times didn't last long. His business had taken a massive hit during the 1998 financial crisis, leaving him heavily in debt. Just 4 months before the murders, Xu had wired him over 4 million HKD to help pay off some of his debts. Most suspiciously, B vanished right after the murders. The police theorized that Xu might have asked B to repay her money, and, feeling cornered, he could have devised a plan to kill her and her friends under the pretense of a blessing ritual. Then he even staged the scene to look like a group suicide, wiping fingerprints and using public phones to hide his involvement. If true, B might have already fled Hong Kong. Therefore, the police immediately checked his travel records. But just as they were about to track him down, B did something unexpected. He showed up at the police station himself to report the death. B claimed he had nothing to do with the murders. He had left Hong Kong for Zhuhai on the morning of July 21st, before the victims had died, and had only returned on July 23rd when he heard the police were looking for him. He even provided travel documents to support his alibi, which customs later confirmed as accurate. With B ruled out, the investigation hit a dead end. The police expanded their search, sifting through hundreds of leads. Finally, they identified a new suspect, a man from Guangdong named Li Yuhui, who called himself a master of Zhou Yi. Li had met Xu, Lin, and Cai multiple times before. A week prior to their death, Xu had even told a friend she was planning to ask Master Li for a ritual blessing. Also, records showed Li had entered Hong Kong on July 19th and left the evening of July 21st, the day of the murders. Most damningly, the two calls to Xu's apartment on the day of the crime were traced to Li. Could Li really be the murderer? And who was this Master Li? Born in 1958 in Guangdong Province, Li had only completed elementary school before becoming a barber's apprentice. During that time, he dabbled in studying the Zhou Yi. Once he felt confident in his skills, he opened his own barbershop and began offering fortune-telling on the side, eventually gaining some local fame. Like B, he later styled himself as a master and scammed his way into wealth. Years earlier, Li visited Hong Kong to see his cousin, Yao Sujuan, who lived in Telford Garden. Through Yao, he met Cai and offered her a fortune-telling session. By sheer luck, his predictions impressed Cai, earning her trust. So in 1998, Cai and his friends invited Li to Shenzhen for consultation and later to Telford Garden for feng shui rituals. Soon, the police contacted Li over the phone. Li admitted he had performed a ritual for the women on July 19th, but claimed Xu cancelled further ceremonies the next day because she had hired another spiritual advisor. Later, he left Hong Kong on July 20th, spending just one night there. Then the police asked him to return to Hong Kong for questioning. However, Li refused, claiming his travel permit had expired. But when the police checked, they found he was lying. So by this point, we can say Li had the means and opportunity to commit the crime. But he lied and refused to cooperate with the investigation, clearly trying to dodge responsibility. On July 28th, Hong Kong police teamed up with Guangdong police to search Yao's apartment, and what they found made Li look even more suspicious. Inside Yao's apartment, the police discovered talismans identical to those at the crime scene, along with rubber bands and nylon ropes used for bundling cash. Later, a bank employee from Standard Chartered Bank confirmed the rubber bands and nylon rope were indeed tied by her, as she was the only one at the bank who knew how to tie knots like that. This was a proof that Xu and her friends had indeed brought the cash to the apartment, and Li was the most likely person to have taken it. The next day, police returned to the crime scene and conducted a thorough sweep using special lightwave tech. Then they found 9 fingerprints on the locks of the bedroom and bathroom doors, and 8 partial prints on the nylon ropes and rubber bands. All matched the prints found at the scene. Meanwhile, Guangdong police discovered that since 28th July, Li had abruptly disconnected all his communication devices, which was super shady. At this point, the police were almost certain that Li was the murderer, or at the very least, deeply involved in the case. So they immediately launched a manhunt to arrest him. After more than a week of staking out, the police finally apprehended Li. During questioning, Li admitted he was involved but firmly denied killing anyone, claiming he was manipulated into helping someone else. Here's what he said happened. While working as an apprentice at a barbershop, Li met a master at the temple who claimed to be the disciple of a renowned monk. This so-called master was the one who introduced Li to the basics of fortune-telling. When Li later visited his sister in Hong Kong, he noticed how superstitious many women were. Smelling an opportunity, he started pretending to be a feng shui master to make some quick cash. He even called the master to come join him in the scam. As we mentioned earlier, during this time, he met Xu and was pleasantly surprised to discover that she was quite wealthy. This realization made him even more eager to stay in her good graces. Over time, their relationship grew closer, and Xu eventually asked him to perform a ritual for herself and her close friends. Li readily agreed and set a date for the following month. But this blessing wasn't just an ordinary prayer. It was a forbidden ritual rumored to extend one's lifespan. And if successful, it would be worth far more than a few $1,000s. While Li had no idea how to perform such a ritual, he wasn't about to let this lucrative opportunity slip away. He lied about his abilities and, as soon as he returned to Guangdong, sought out the master for help. But unfortunately, the so-called master didn't know the ritual either. Still, he had his eyes on the wealth of Xu and her friends. So he suggested, why don't we just kill them and take their money instead? Li may have been a con artist, but he was too cowardly to commit murder, so he flatly refused the idea. However, the master wasn't about to let it go. He threatened Li, saying, "We're getting this money no matter what, and if I pull this off, you are already an accomplice. If you try to back out, don't blame me for being ruthless." Trapped and terrified, Li reluctantly agreed to make introductions, but swore he wouldn't participate in the murders. On July 21st, around midday, Li and the master arrived at Hong Kong's Telford Garden to meet Xu and her friends. The so-called ritual began. Li instructed the three women to write down all her worries on pieces of paper, a move meant to stage these notes as suicide letters, creating an illusion that they had taken their own lives to mislead the police. Next, he led each of the 5 women into separate rooms, telling them to offer their prayers privately. In reality, he used this time to spike their prepared life-extending water with sodium cyanide. The women, completely unaware, drank the poisoned water, believing it was part of the ritual. Within minutes, they began experiencing symptoms: cardiac arrest, difficult breathing. 10 minutes later, they were all dead. Once they confirmed the women were deceased, Li and the master cleaned up the scene, packed up 1.2 million HKD in cash, and went their separate ways. The master fled back to Guangdong, while Li headed to his cousin's house to divide the loot. However, within 2 days, news of the murders broke. Realizing things were spiraling out of control, Li took 660,000 HKD and went on the run. During his interrogation, Li confessed to the sequence of the events, but firmly claimed ignorance regarding the source of the poison and the whereabouts of the master. He even denied knowing the master's real name, background, or address. It was clear he was lying to shift the blame. Frustrated by his evasiveness, the police shifted its focus to other potential leads. Investigators discovered that Li's girlfriend, Yin Li, had also traveled to Hong Kong on July 19th. She was suspected of being an accomplice and might have additional information about the case. As expected, Yin quickly admitted she had gone to Hong Kong with Li. However, she denied knowing anything about the master and claimed she hadn't seen Li interact with anyone else during their trip. According to her, Li told her the money was scammed from Xu and her friends. Then he split the cash into 2 parts, one hidden at his cousin's house and the other converted into RMB and deposited into a bank account. Meanwhile, further investigation revealed that earlier in July, Li had approached a friend named Zhang, who worked at a chemical plant, and requested cyanide under the pretense of using it to disinfect a fish pond. Zhang provided him with sodium cyanide and even warned him about its lethal toxicity. Additionally, a thorough review of border records showed no individuals matching the master's description had entered or exited Hong Kong around July 21st. Forensic analysis later identified partial fingerprints on the nylon rope and rubber bands at the crime scene, all belonging to Li. These findings pointed to an undeniable conclusion. The master never existed. Li had orchestrated the entire scheme and personally poisoned the 5 victims. With this damning evidence, the police interrogated Li once again. Despite the overwhelming proof, he refused to admit to the murders. Still, the evidence spoke for itself. On October 5, 1998, Li was formally arrested. On March 23, 1999, he was convicted of intentional homicide and sentenced to death. On April 20th of the same year, Li was executed, bringing an end to his shocking and gruesome case. Now that the case was wrapped up, the ghostly rumors surrounding Telford Garden only grew wilder. Turns out, there was already a tragic incident there 19 years ago. On July 22, 1979, around 2 p.m., 6 construction workers finished lunch and returned to Telford Garden, Block C, to continue their work. They boarded a temporary lift to reach the upper floors, but as the lift reached the 12th floor, crashing straight to the ground in a matter of seconds, and all 6 workers died on the spot. Later, the official explained the accident was caused by a piece of construction rebar between the 4th and 5th floors. It snagged the lift's cable and then got stuck on the temporary lift frame, causing the cable to snap under the strain. The most creepy part is, this happened right where Unit 501 is located. Now, if you're paying attention, you've probably noticed something strange. Both incidents not only happened in the same location, but also at eerily similar times. The 5 women died between 1:30 and 2:30 p.m. on July 21st, and later, Miss Yao jumped to her death. Her time of death, 2 p.m. of July 22nd. That makes a total of 6 deaths, exactly matching the 6 construction workers. So this led locals to speculate that the construction workers were seeking ghost marriages and took 6 women with them. The rumors got so out of hand that the property management brought in masters to perform exorcisms to calm residents. But it didn't help. To this day, property values at Block C are below average, and Unit 501 has changed hands 6 times with no one daring to live there. It's now one of Hong Kong's most infamous haunted houses. But honestly, I think these 2 events might just be a coincidence. The women who died last, Miss Yao, had nothing to do with the case. She jumped because she was brainwashed by a cult. With that in mind, there were only 5 victims in this case, and the timeline don't even match. Besides, even if someone really arranged a ghost marriage for those 6 construction workers, 2 of the women were just little girls. Using kids for a ghost marriage, that's absolutely disgusting. Speaking of which, let me explain this infamous ancient Chinese custom, ghost marriages. Back in the day, people believed that unmarried individuals who died would become restless spirits, unable to find peace and potentially harming their living relatives. So, a custom emerged, finding a partner for the deceased. Of course, that partner had to be dead too. People would search for another single person who had passed away. Then they'd consult a feng shui master to check if their astrological charts matched. If they were compatible, a ceremony would be held, and the 2 would be buried together as a married couple. Usually, the man's family paid the woman's family for the body. Yes, you could think of it as buying the bride's corpse. As this practice became more widespread, the supply couldn't keep up with the demand. So, what did people do? They started targeting the living. They'd murder people with mental disabilities, mostly women, and then sell their corpses for profit. Even worse, some parents, especially those who favor sons over daughters, would sell their daughters to wealthy families for ghost marriages. Of course, these girls would end up murdered. Unbelievable, right? Actually, ancient rulers were aware of how horrifying and inhumane this practice was and repeatedly outlawed it. But with each change in dynasty and during times of social unrest, it kept resurfacing over and over again. Shockingly, even today, in some extremely remote and underdeveloped areas, ghost marriages still secretly happen. However, in modern China, such actions are absolutely illegal and can lead to serious jail time. Honestly, looking at this custom is not so much terrifying as it's heartbreaking. In those backward times, women were treated like lambs to the slaughter, squeezed dry of every last drop of value, even in death. It's moments like this that made me truly grateful for how far society has come and how much more liberated people's mindsets are today. Alright, that wraps up this video. In the next episode, it's time for the much anticipated true haunting stories from netizens. Don't miss it. See you there.